back to Typically Unique. I'm Kim Aponte, and I'm here with my husband, Carlos.
Hello.
So on our last episode, we left you with a little bit of a cliffhanger and why we were begging to differ with the doctors. And so that's leading us into today's episode where we are going to explain that more. What were we seeing with Aiden's Bruton's disease, so the X-linked agammaglobulinemia, that is his immune disorder, that, he's been receiving treatments for since he was 5, and, we're in the hospital to battle the AML. But we were looking at his blood work results and starting to see some things. So that's that we were questioning.
And we were calling it a potential medical miracle, right?
We were very hopeful. And so today we want to explain what we were seeing. We're going to show you what we saw that got us so excited.
Right.
So we have more clips. And remember, we were in the hospital in 2010, the fall of 2010 through the spring of 2011. So at this point right now where Carlos has created the board is April 2011.
Yep, and we're almost going home. And just to pile on a little bit about the Brutons, and we're in the hospital because of AML. And nobody in the history of the world, I said this in the last episode or so, but had both at the same time. So Aiden is, doing something or has something that nobody else has ever had. So there's some new territory here, and we want to be a part of it. We're trying to help with some things that we're seeing and bring it to the doctor's attention to maybe help us understand what's going on with our son. So right. We really get into it in this first clip, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We believe there's going to be a miracle, and we're going to show you right now why we think that.
Okay, in part 2 of Medical Miracle, I'm going to focus on the other side of this cell, which is the lymphoid side, which creates somewhere downstream, and again, I don't understand all of this, but somewhere downstream creates Aiden's IgG, IgA, and IgM. The IgG is used to help fight infection. So Aiden doesn't make any of these past the immature stage, so his counts are relatively low. As you can see, IgG, those numbers are in the 1300 range. That's because Aiden gets an IV infusion. Gets an IV infusion every 3 weeks, and will have it for the rest of his life. So this number is relatively high because he gets that artificially. These numbers are above that mature line because he doesn't make those. He doesn't get these during his infusion because he doesn't need these to survive. So when he gets blood work, all of it's washed out, all this stuff's washed out, and he only gets this, IgG, because that's all he needs. Curiously, when Aiden was getting treated for AML and going through the intense chemotherapy, I noticed that Aiden, prior to the chemotherapy, his numbers looked like a Richter scale. Up and down, wasn't really regulated. However, when he started getting chemotherapy, I noticed that his numbers started to regulate. Now, the doctors kept telling me over and over again that they regulated it. And I was like, look, as nicely as I possibly could, you guys had 7 years to try to regulate this from 2003. And it was like this. And all of a sudden he gets chemotherapy and boom, it started, really leveling off. So I asked the doctors, let's see if my theory's true, because I think Aiden is starting to make IgGs on his own. I think that the intense chemotherapy that you're giving him for the AML has reset his bone marrow. His bone marrow not only has reset on the myeloid side, so he doesn't mutate to leukemia, but I believe that it reset on this side as well, even though this is very downstream from this cell right here. But they said, no, it's impossible, it can't happen. So I asked them, please, let's not give Aiden the IgG. Let's see what happens. And they go, well, if we do that, and these numbers fall, and he can't fight infection, especially coming off this cancer treatment, Aiden could be in a grave situation. So what we can do, however, is because Aiden doesn't need IgA, and he doesn't get that, and he doesn't need IgM, and he doesn't get that artificially, we can test those numbers and see if those low numbers start to rise. Because if these go up, he's making them, because we're not giving to him artificially. So let's see what happens. Let's look for part 3.
All right.
Okay.
So so the first point about that first clip is the doctors told us that they regulated Aiden's IgG through years of giving him that infusion. And I couldn't buy that.
It didn't make sense.
It didn't make sense. And, Kim and I talked about this a little bit. And when Aiden received his artificial IgG, his numbers went up. And let's just use 1310. I think that's the number I keep showing on the screen there. Regardless if he was regulated or not, if his body used some of that artificial IgG or the natural ones that couldn't get to maturity, if they tested him the next day, his number wouldn't be 1310. It'd be like 1770 or 1270 or something like that. It would be lower because he's using them up and he's not making any mature ones. So, how is that even possible?
So what we showed on that board was the IgG levels looking like a mountain from the time he was 5 to the time he's in the hospital at 12 years old.
Getting chemotherapy.
Getting chemotherapy when he's 12. So from 5 to 12, his IgG level would be low at the time that it was scheduled to go in for treatment. And then we'd go in, he would get his infusion, and that number would go up, and their goal was to keep it around 1,300. So when they would draw his blood after the infusion, it would go up and be in the normal range. Then for 3 weeks, he wouldn't be getting it. So that number would slowly come down because his body's using it. It would hit the lowest point. It would be time for his infusion again. It would shoot back up to normal and repeat that for 7 years. And that's what the data looked like for 7 years. But then what Carlos showed on the board was after he started getting chemotherapy and they're still drawing his blood to look at the IgG levels, the line flattened out and stayed consistent. He didn't have a dip that went low right before he was getting the infusion. It was just staying in a normal range.
Exactly. So, but I did agree with the doctors in one point, right? I was saying, just stop giving him IgGs. Right. He's making them. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, in case, you are wrong, Carlos, do you want to put your son at risk? That, these numbers tank. He's going through all this stuff anyway. We have to kind of keep his body fighting. We're giving him some help with that, with, antibodies and, or whatever medicine there. I shouldn't say antibodies, but, we're giving him, things to help fight infections and things like that.
The IVIG that's doing that. Mm-hmm.
But, if we don't give him that and his numbers tank, it's going to be tough getting him back up again because, his body's going to go into some
You'd put him in a dire situation.
Yeah,
and we didn't want to do that.
No, but luckily for us, those other two, those brother and sister IgA, IgMs, they weren't giving him those. And so we were like, they told me, they said, what we'll do is we'll test all three, IgA, IgM, IgG, because they weren't testing the first two. The IgA, IgM, they were always testing the IgG. We'll test those from here on out. We're not giving them to him. And if he starts regulating those on his own, we know we aren't giving it to him. So I thought that was a great compromise. And this way it wouldn't put our son like in a bubble, like to be a boy in the bubble, which I don't even know if that's the right term I should use or not. But
yeah. So before I talk about that, just to reiterate, so they're always testing. I know it's confusing hearing these three: IgG, IgA, IgM. The IgG is like the main thing. That was their main focus. He needed that to survive, and they were always testing that. They didn't want to take him off the treatment to keep that number up because that was too risky to do that. So they're going to start monitoring these other two numbers because they weren't doing that in the past. They weren't looking at those. So now they're going to start looking at those because they're not artificially giving them to him. I know I just repeated what you just said. I just wanted to, it's complicated to kind of understand that. We went through it over and over and over again to make sure we could understand it back in 2011. And so another thing that you mentioned was how his cells, or the doctors kept saying, well, that's way downstream. And their reasoning for why they didn't think the Brutons could be cured. That's what they kept saying. Right. And my understanding now, again, not a medical doctor, just when they say this downstream, I have a little bit of understanding with your cells. You kind of have these little like factory process that your cells go through because they will get turned into different types of cells or organelles or to perform different functions in your body. So Aiden's, his cells are supposed to be going through all these different little, processes. His just stop at some point. So that is what allowed him to survive from birth to age 5 until we finally got him diagnosed because he had a little bit. He had some things going on. It just never got to that full end of the factory line production system to do their jobs. If he would not, and I remember the doctors sitting us down and explaining this to us when he was first diagnosed with Bruton's, he would have been a boy in the bubble with nothing, no immune system, and that's not where we were at, and we didn't want to mess with that either at this time with, saying, oh, stop giving it to him. No, we didn't want to do that. Right.
So in this next clip, we get some numbers, and I am going to try to not to gloat, about the numbers that we get. So let's take a look at that one.
All right, everybody, thanks for following along. I'll try to make this the last video, so I'll try to make this quick. Here's what we know. Prior to Aiden's chemotherapy, his IgG levels were kind of up and down. Once he started getting chemo, started to regulate. I noticed this and brought it to the doctor's attention. And my suggestion was, or my thought was, is that Aiden had started to make some IgGs on his own. I asked them to stop giving him the IgGs because we can find out if Aiden is making this on his own. If he starts to go low, we give him the IVIG infusion, the numbers go up. Doctors didn't want to do that. It would compromise his immune system. So here's the way that they figured they could test to see if Aiden started making this again. Coming back down here, the brother and sister to IgG is IgA and IgM. As we talked about in some of the earlier videos, Aiden doesn't need these to survive. He only needs this to help fight infection. These do not do that. So because his IgA and IgM do not mature, they will stay below the line, the maturity level. The IgG, because he gets them through IVIG, he gets them, and those numbers are mature numbers, even though he only gets those through infusion. Every single doctor told me that if they test all three of these again, and normally they don't test these two, but if they test these three again, I will see similar numbers, which will put to rest my theory that Aiden is starting to regulate the IgG, because he wouldn't be making any of these, and none of these will be going past the maturity line. They did the test. We got the results a couple days ago, and these are the results. IgG, of course, well above the maturity line, because he gets those through infusion anyway. That's expected. However, he doesn't make, according to the doctors, IgA or IgM. But these numbers are well above normal, what's been normal for Aiden. Look at that. When we got these results, the reverberation around here was amazing. Every single doctor, attending, fellow, resident, friend of a resident, friend of a friend of a resident, told us that Aiden's results would look like this, with that one number hanging out there, only because they give it to him in IVIG. Wouldn't you know, that is what we got. So, what does that mean? Well, unfortunately, I gloated too much on this test result. I'm going to have to do one more video.
All right. Yeah, sorry. I gloated. I was gloating because, it just seemed like common sense, and I was getting such pushback. It just felt really good in that moment. And, again, I don't want to take away from what these medical professionals are doing to help us and all that, but it's just felt good to have my theory, our hypothesis to come a little bit true. Mm-hmm. So in that moment, which I'll talk about in a second, maybe I was like, all right, let's go, and I was a little bit happy.
At least we felt like we weren't crazy.
Yes. And the numbers showed some stuff, right? We actually got some data.
So on the board that you were keeping, so remember, they're only looking at the IgA and the IgM to prove or disprove this theory that we're asking about. Is Aiden's immune system starting to produce these on its own from the chemotherapy? So the IgA, they had a number from back in 2003, and that was like a 6. And that number on this most recent 2011 test was a 71. In the normal range. Actually, it was a little
above.
One number above Aiden's normal range.
Aiden's normal range, right.
Yes, yep. Not like, Aiden's normal range. The IgM number back in 2003 was a 5. And that number at 2011, when they tested it, went to 31.
And that was also in his range.
Also in his normal range. So you could imagine...
Let's go.
We're like, oh my gosh. Yep. But here's how it really went.
Yeah. So we do rounds. We talk about that all the time. We're doing rounds. They come and talk about the daily plan. And at the end of rounds, right before rounds was over, I get handed the blood work or the lab results for this. And they had mentioned, before I could see the numbers for myself, that Aiden had very high IgA, IgM levels, and they didn't expect that. So I'm kind of like leaning against the door during rounds. I'm just kind of like, another day of rounds, keeping my little journal. And when they said that, I like slapped the wall like in a high five motion or something. Turned around, walked in the room, did a little pimp step, came back out. It was like, yes, and for that 30 seconds, I just felt fantastic.
So remember, he's there. I'm not.
Yeah,
Only one of us is there at the hospital. So.
I felt fantastic. And there was a few people in the rounds that were like, hey, kind of good deal, and others were just stoic, Well, they went on to say that, well, maybe it's not what you think it is, and just after 30 seconds of, me almost doing cartwheels and somersaults.
Yeah, we're like, come on, show some excitement.
Yeah, help me out here. But so two things happened in that moment. One was that made me want to put it on the board, right? Yeah. Because they were trying to temper my excitement, and I'm like, okay, I got to see this. And this is what made me physically put it on the board, because I was going to explain what happened to anybody who walked into that room, including Kim, so that was number one.
That started the board that day.
Yeah, that started the board. So that got me going. And they did temper my excitement a little bit. So we
were excited, but in this next clip, we're going to show how they kind of dampered that down. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so this is the last video, I promise, at least on this whiteboard here. So as you saw, the IgG level test that we did showed, again, normal ranges. However, the IgA test that we had done all of a sudden shows a spike in Aiden's IgA levels. Also shows a spike in Aiden's IgM levels. The medical staff here told me numerous times that those points should be down here and here. So when we got these results, they came up with 3 reasons as to why we got these results. And here they are. The first reason we got this result was because it was a lab error. The second reason is because this is Aiden's normal range. So this being the low, this being the high, and this is kind of Aiden's normal range, where it should be kind of up here. Makes sense, but just curious how these numbers are always down here and this one's way up here. But understand. And the last one is stress. Aiden's been going through such a stressful time while he's been in the hospital that stress made his bone marrow work overtime, creating a bunch of these cells, which kicked out 10 times these normal cells. Okay, so the unfortunate thing was for us, or at least for me, was I wanted them to put number 4, and number 4 being that maybe somehow Aiden's bone marrow reset and Aiden is cured of agammaglobulinemia. They never once said that to us. They don't even expect that to happen. But what they did say is that they will continue to monitor and test Aiden's IgG and IgA and IgM levels. And what they told us was, if his numbers continue to stay high like this, they will begin to wean him off the IgG, continue to do extensive testing on his bone marrow and blood work to see if he has actually somehow started to recreate these cells on his own. The significance of this is, and for all of you out there who, like us, are very happy that at this point Aiden is cured of AML. This was 6 months, 7 months of intense chemotherapy, but Aiden's done with it. If he's cured and stays in remission, he'll never have to deal with this again. I think what Aiden most wants is to never have to deal with this again either. Because every 3 weeks for his entire life, he has always had to have these IVIG treatments. 1 day out of his life every 3 weeks is taken for this. He can't participate in certain sports because of this disease. So to him, this is much more He is so much more looking for a cure of this, something that would be with him for his whole life, than the struggle that he went through with this.
Oh, man, they burst our bubble, didn't they? But
Yeah, they were.
so there were 3 reasons, right, that they gave us that, this could be a false positive, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Stress, which I do understand some of that.
Yeah, they made sense.
Yeah, I understand the stress portion. Lab error, I mean, those numbers were too
That's
exact.
our go-to. It's always a lab error, right?
Yeah,
like that's
yeah.
an easy go-to.
Yeah, so, okay, well, we could figure that out in 24 hours, right? Just do another test there.
Right.
And then it was in Aiden's normal range, which normal and range is, really.
Yeah, and that one was kind of far-fetched because, number one, they had not been testing the IgA or the IgM for them to even really get a normal range for him. They only had a couple data points.
Yeah.
Like 2, exactly. So, and it really wasn't.
And
but,
the previous numbers
whatever.
that we saw were very low, 5, 6, 10,
Yeah.
8. I mean, they were low numbers. So,
Right.
For that to be in his normal range, was, I wasn't quite sure about that.
And when we say these were their explanations, it was his immunologist doctor coming in to have this conversation, and they weren't at this hospital with us. They have their own office somewhere else, and they would just come in if we asked, if we asked for them to come in. And these were their reasons, I believe.
But number 4 on that list that I wish they would have gave us, because they gave us 1, 2, 3. Number 4 should have been, well, maybe we have a cure here.
Yeah.
There should have been just that glimmer of hope, that possibility. Maybe all this has actually cleared it because, going back to the beginning, nobody in the history of the world has had AML and X-linked A-gammaglobulinemia at the same time. So nobody's had...
It's not documented anywhere. No
not documented.
documentation.
Nobody's
of it.
had chemotherapy, and they could see the effects of that chemotherapy on Brutons. So why not add number 4?
Possible cure.
Possible cure. To me, that is...
We added it.
Yeah, we added it. We added it on our own. So this is kind of almost the end, right? However...
Well, this is when, so then they're like, okay, well, we're going to start to wean him off the IVIG. And so what that looked like was just them keep taking his blood, see where those IgG levels were, because that's the critical one, the number they need for him to stay safe. And they would it wasn't like you would get less medicine because they can't do that. The medicine's the medicine. The dose is the dose. But the way they wean it is just say, oh, you can go another week.
Right.
Your level is still in the normal range. We can wait another week. And then test again. Oh, we can wait another week. So that was how the plan was to wean him.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Which was... Again, I thought that was another good compromise, instead of just giving it him on the normal, whatever the normal schedule was. I thought that was a good compromise for them to extend it out. So, hey, we're going to test for the IgAs, IgMs, them extending an olive branch to, prove or disprove our point, and to kind of wean him off this, maybe. As we go forward. So they were making strides. So very happy about that.
Yes.
Yep.
So, we're full of hope, at least to see. We want to find out where is this going to lead. And we were always having the debate that, if this is the cure to get this intense chemotherapy, because it's brutal. It was brutal. Mm-hmm. The side effects that Aiden had were awful. Yeah. So would patients with Brutons, and we're talking kids, so as a parent, would you want your kid, but there are adults.
There are adults,
if you're living with it, you're living with it your whole life. So there's grown adults living with this currently. If they found out I could go through 6 months, 7 months of a brutal, harsh treatment, but then be done and cured of this, and would they, weigh those risks of, I was always like, oh, I wouldn't want that harsh treatment for a cure. There's a treatment that is low risk. You can live with it. It stinks to have to get an infusion every month, but the question is...
But I'm the opposite, though, babe.
Yes.
I'm the opposite.
We're on two sides of the fence on
Yeah.
this one. I don't think I would do that. And he's like 100%, yeah.
If I was a kid, like at Aiden's age, I would probably go through what we've been going through. But the day I turned 18, if she was my mother, it's like, no, we don't want to risk that. The day I turned 18, I'm like, admit me, I want to do this, because I would not want to have that every month for the rest of my life.
And if this is a potential cure, should patients know about it and have that option to make their own decision about that? So this is another question we have for you. If you're watching or listening to this, please leave a comment on your thoughts. Which side of that fence would you be on?
Would you just have the infusions once a month, Kim? Team Kim? Or would you have the 6 to 7 months intense chemotherapy and never have that of harsh treatment, yes, and never have that shot again? Team Carlos.
Right, and we're just hopeful at this point in 2011 that this option might be available for people.
Right.
How amazing is that? So the next episode, we have a big reveal.
Yes.
And we will explain, finally, the end results.
With one last video of this Bruton's stuff that we've been talking about. So
yes,
I'm excited about it.
Yes.
So hopefully we can get to it really soon.
Join us back for that.
Bye.
Bye.